So I want to give you kind of where we're headed the next several weeks. So for the next 7 weeks, we're going to be having 6 weeks, I think. We're going to have our elders speaking, giving testimony, giving you the opportunity to know them, and felt like this would be a good venue for that. We set apart Elder with Craig and then Don Sunday, and lots of folks are new, and lots of folks don't know who our elders are, and so one of the things that giving them one or two assignments is, one is they can just share testimony, and or they can do a word, or they can do both. So they can do a testimony and weave it through the word. And I think that's what Chuck's doing today, right? Yeah, okay. So Chuck Gilliland, come on up, Chuck. So Chuck has been here, how long did you say? 13 years? Yeah, and probably been an elder for 10, something like that. Has taught Sunday school, former cop up at Dallas, Fort Worth, and has been spending his retirement writing devotionals for cops. So, like, to give you an example, one of them might be, it is Psalms through the eyes of a cop, Matthew through the, golly, look at you. And you're a good-looking guy. Look at you. When you were young, yeah. So, gosh, that just threw me off. Yeah. How many books have you written? 9 books. So it's also, he'll be telling you a little bit about this, but also is involved with Fellowship of Christian Peace Officers. He's on the national board for that. And then he does a new thing that I'll let him tell you all about, okay? So Chuck, come on up and talk to us.
Good evening. I'm very thrilled to be here to do this. I don't know about being thrilled about being the first one to go. I was kind of hoping somebody else would go and I could watch what they did, but hey. Anyway, so here we are. Like Mike said, I want to there's a lot of scripture that weaves its way in and out of my life. And there's one very specific that I'm going to tell you a little story about, but it really played a big part on what I called my second chance. I had a first chance. I came to Christ early, then drifted away, but then God got a hold of me for a second time. So I absolutely love the testimony of my life that He's given me. You hear a lot of people say that, if I could go back and do it all over again, I would change this or I would do that. I've gotten to the point in my life where I realized that I would not change a single thing in my life because of the fear of how it might affect something that is in my life today. Because I'm so proud and pleased at where God's got me today. Jeremiah 10:23 says, I know, O Lord, that a man's way is not in himself, nor is it in a man who walks to direct his own steps. I'd come to the point where I've acknowledged every twist and turn, everything that's good, everything that's bad, happened in my life for a reason. And when something happened in my life, it's like the verse in Job 1:21 that says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, but blessed be the name of the Lord. And in that I have learned to be thankful in the good and the bad. Now that's obviously not easy to do, and it's taken me a while to get there. But along those lines, there was something really significant that happened in my life, and I want to, and I do this, I tell a whole lot of stories. So hopefully this will be entertaining, hopefully be somewhat enlightening. But y'all know the story of Helen Keller. Maybe do, maybe. Okay, I had to read that book when I was in junior high. And I've got dyslexia. I've always had dyslexia, and found out about it much later in life. But my mom and dad were school teachers, and they knew I didn't read very well. So when I had to read this book in junior high, Mom got real smart, and she went and rented the 1962 version of The Miracle Worker. And so I watched the story of Helen Keller. And there was something in that movie that really made an impression on me. Helen Keller was mute and deaf and blind. I mean, she had absolutely zero ability to communicate with the outside world. Just imagine someone that's totally isolated all their life. I mean, sure, you can touch things, but there's no communication. So she was very stubborn. If you've seen the movie or read the book, she's very stubborn. She's very angry. And she couldn't understand why people were always pulling on her and tugging on her and trying to make her do things that she just didn't want to have anything to do with. The Miracle Worker is about Anne Sullivan, who was the teacher and who taught Helen Keller to sign. And there was a point in the movie where Anne Sullivan had gotten really frustrated with Helen. She took her outside, and this was back in the time where you had the well that you had a hand pump. And she goes outside and she's trying to draw some water, and she's pumping water, and she sticks Helen's hand under the water, and Helen's trying to pull it back, and she's tugging it, and there's this tug of war, but she's signing water. And there's this fight going on. All of a sudden, Helen Keller, you can just see the expression on her face. She just looks up like, wait a minute, what was that? W-A-T-E-R. 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 And she got it. It was a light bulb moment where she went from no communication and being totally isolated to all of a sudden knowledge that there was an ability to have communication. There was a way to talk and communicate with other people. That was a big moment in her life. And I have a moment, the reason I tell you that story, I have a moment in my life that's incredibly similar. It was, Jesus took advantage of teachable moments. He would take an object lesson where he would teach while he was actually doing the act of performing a miracle. And that's kind of what I look at this Helen Keller story as. So I'm going to tell you first the verse in Job 1:21. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So the reason that verse is so important to me is because in 2008, I was having just this incredible second calling where God had given me a second chance, and I had jumped at the opportunity to take that second chance, and He was opening doors for me in my life. But one of the things, I had gone to a men's Men at the Cross conference in Fort Worth. And one of the things I was most excited about was Stephen Curtis Chapman was going to be opening up. And I was huge. I still am a huge Stephen Curtis Chapman fan. So I was excited about this. Well, about 2 months before the event, y'all probably remember his son was backing out of the driveway and ran over their 5-year-old daughter and killed her. Just tragic. And I knew when I heard the news, I was like, oh man, there's no way in a month or two he's going to be opening up at this Men at the Cross event. But I was still excited to go, went. And so I'm sitting like on row 2. I mean, I got there early, got a good seat. And all of a sudden, Stephen Curtis Chapman comes out, first one on stage. And I'm just like, I was blown away that he was there. And he gives a short testimony. This was his first public appearance since the tragedy. And he thanked everyone for their prayers. And he said he was going to do things a little different. He was going to play a song that he had never played before. And it's because it was not one of his songs. It was a Matt Redman song. And I'm sure you know it. It was very popular. But it's called Every Blessing. So Stephen Curtis Chapman starts singing the song. And he was doing really well. And he got to the chorus. And the chorus says, every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. And then this is where he lost it. The next couple of verses says, you give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. He started trying the chorus, couldn't make it through. Just started crying. And of course, everybody in the audience was crying. We all knew what had happened. So he tries to sing it again. Can't make it through. Tries it again. He did this like 3 or 4 times, and I'm talking like snot blowing, crying, just ugly crying, and everybody was ugly crying. I got choked up this afternoon when I was writing that down. He eventually just gave up on trying to sing the chorus. But that was that Helen Keller moment for me of a man who had experienced such tragedy and then could turn around and say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And that stuck with me, and it changed me, and I began to see my circumstances as not always from the enemy and, oh, poor pitiful me, I'm being attacked or something, but that God gives and God takes away, and he has a purpose in giving and taking away. And it was my job to try and see what that purpose was and try to live according to his word through that purpose, through the good or the bad. So with that, I'm going to get into my testimony here. First, I want to read Jeremiah 9:23-24. Thus says the Lord, let not a wise man boast of his wisdom, and let not the mighty man boast of his strength. Let not the rich man boast of his riches, but let him boast of this, that he understands and knows me, and me being God. So if you're going to boast about anything, it says not your strength, not your might, not your wisdom, not your riches, but boast about knowing God. 2 Corinthians 10:17 and 18 says, but he who boasts is to boast in the Lord. For it is not he who commends himself that is approved, but he whom the Lord commends. So I tell you that just to warn you, I'm about to go all out bragging on God and what God's done in my life. You're going to hear some things that I'm going to tell you right now. Even I cringed a little bit writing some of these things down. It's going to sound like I'm patting myself on the back, and I'm not. And I'm going to try and remind you every time I get to one of those that but for the glory of God, Chuck had favor from the Lord in this. But for the glory of God. And usually, there's a meme I saw about a week ago, and it said, trust in God's plans because he counted for your stupidity before he made them. Wow, that's me. I was like, dang, okay, so God accounted for my mistakes before he made the plan, and he figured that into the plan. So, here we go. I was born in Hyco in 1968, and yes, Hyco had a hospital at the time. It's hard for me to believe, too. Not only that, my mom and dad tell me that it had snowed that day, and there was snow all over the ground. So, how weird is that? That's how I came into this world. I lived the first couple of years with my grandpa and my granny because my mom and dad were going to college, and they wanted to finish their education. And they were going to Tarleton. And it was cheaper for my dad to live in the boys' dorm and my mom to live in the girls' dorm than it was to live in the married housing. So they didn't tell anybody they got married. And for a long time, I thought, yeah, it's just an excuse. They probably never really got married. But anyway, I've seen some pictures. They actually did. But for the first couple of years, I lived with my grandparents. I went to kindergarten through second grade in Gustine. while living in Comanche. I don't know if Craig's here, but Craig would appreciate that. So I was born and raised and had just have lived all around this area. When I was 8 years old, we moved to Cleburne, and we started going to First Baptist Church of Cleburne, thanks to my grandmother. We never went to church when we lived in Comanche, but once we moved to Cleburne, my dad was horribly afraid of my grandmother. His mom ruled with an iron fist, and when we moved to Cleburne, by golly, we were going to church because grandmother went to church, which was awesome. Shortly thereafter, April 10th of 1977, I gave my life to Jesus at that church, and my grandmother took a picture of it, and she called it my real birthday. And I always keep this picture in the front of my Bible, even when I change Bibles, to remind me that April 10th is my real birthday, because that's when I was born again to Jesus Christ. From that point on, I followed the Lord. I was in church every Sunday night, every Wednesday. Every time the doors were open, if my mom and dad wouldn't give me a ride to church, I'd call grandmother and she'd pick me up on the way to church. I was just trying to soak up everything I could. I was living for the Lord as best I could as a kid, even through high school. And yes, I got made fun of quite a bit. I was a Boy Scout, everybody said. But I had an incredible pastor named Ron Horton. And he was kind of a cross between a fire and brimstone preacher and a grace preacher. You never knew what you were going to get when you showed up to church on Sunday, but he led me to faith in Christ. I spent a lot of time with him. Sometimes I don't even really believe I did it myself because I know myself now, but I would go after school, I'd go to the church and I would just sit with him and talk. And it wasn't long before I felt I was called to full-time ministry, which really excited him. And we talked about it all the time. I didn't know anything but being a kid, so I gravitated towards being a youth pastor because I thought, man, I could probably do that. Not that it's easy, but I'm enough of a kid that I could figure it out, I guess. So my plan was I was going to go to Baylor because that's where grandmother went to school. After Baylor, I was going to go to seminary. Then I was going to become a youth pastor. Well, there's kind of a problem with that. I thought it was a great idea, and Pastor Horton, Dr. Horton, thought it was a great idea. But if you remember the story in 2 Samuel, David wanted to build a temple. So he talked to Nathan, said, man, I'm going to build a temple for the Lord. And Nathan's like, that's a great idea. I think go do it. So he was going to make plans and do it. Well, that night, God talked to Nathan, and he said, yeah, that's a great idea, but nobody consulted me about it, and that's not going to happen. Well, that's kind of what happened with my whole seminary and youth pastor dreams. That was not going to happen. A big part of the reason that wasn't going to happen was because I had a lot of trouble in school. I didn't have good grades. I had a younger brother who was 4 years younger than me, but sharp as a whip. And mom and dad, it was the typical thing. Mom and dad will always say, why can't you be like your little brother? Make straight A's. Doesn't even have to study. He's so smart. But you don't even try. You just, yeah. And they loved me, and I loved my mom and dad, but they just thought I was dumb as a stump. Nobody could figure out why in the world I couldn't read. I couldn't do most things. So, obviously, when the time came to apply for schools, Baylor really didn't want to have much to do with me. So, derailed a lot of my plans. And the funny thing about it is, my grandmother was also a school teacher, and throughout high school, she would come over to the house after school, and she would tutor me so I could pass my classes. And so one day, I'm a senior in high school, and I think it was close to the end of school, okay? So this shows you how much this helps. But grandmother comes into the house and calls for a family meeting. My mom, dad, me, not my little brother, thank goodness, but and her. she's got this stack of articles. She'd been doing all this research, and this is 1986, okay? This is the height of the AIDS epidemic, okay? Everybody's scared to death. The world's coming to an end, and everybody's going to die. So she sits us all down, and she said, I finally figured it out. Chuck's got dyslexia. And I didn't know what dyslexia was. It didn't sound good, but I seriously asked my grandmother, I was like, oh my gosh, how long do I have? And yeah, just like that, they were all like, oh my gosh. No, it's not quite like that. So I was able to get into Tarleton, thank goodness. And that's, if you'd seen some of those pictures, I'll explain some of them here in a minute. I got into Tarleton, and I was really confused. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. Because growing up, I had always thought I was going to serve full-time in the ministry. And now that dream seemed like it was over. It was done. But for the grace of God, He put me at Tarleton State University. My first semester in the dorms, I was very lonely. My roommate and all my buddies on my dorm would go out on Friday, Saturday nights. They'd get into bars, they'd go to parties, and they'd come back and tell all these stories. And they were just having so much fun. And here I was sitting in my dorm room because I knew better. I knew I wasn't supposed to do that kind of stuff. And so, man, I was a good boy for a semester. The second semester started. I nearly flunked out my first semester. But anyway, second semester started, and I'm in my dorm room on a Friday night, and I'm the only one in the dorms. Everybody's gone out. Everybody's having a good time. And I'm almost embarrassed to say this. I raised my arms, and I said, God, would you just leave me alone and let me have some fun? And He did. I've often heard that God is a gentleman and He won't force you to do anything. Well, up until that point, the reason I think I had been such a good kid all through high school and growing up was because I had a conscience and a Holy Spirit that would just point true north all the time. Like, I'm not supposed to go that way. There's a way. And I would be obedient and go that way. All of a sudden, that conscience didn't talk to me anymore. That I didn't hear that voice. I didn't have that, this is not right, you shouldn't do this. And even through that, when that second semester started, and I decided to go out with the guys and do what the guys did, that second or third week was rush week. And that's where all the fraternities invite you in for a week. They interview you. They throw some parties. And they see if you'd be a good fit for them. Well, there's about 6 of us, and we had absolutely no intention of joining a fraternity. But the food was free, and there was a possibility of getting beer. So we went. We visited Delta Chi. We visited Kappa Alpha. And then the third or fourth night, we went to visit a fraternity called Lambda Chi Alpha. And we get in, and they introduce us. All the fraternities had little sisters who would help them during events and things. So they introduced us to their little sisters. And there was one that caught my eye. Her name was Angie Crouch. And I knew immediately that she was the one. And she didn't come tonight because I think she knew I would embarrass her. But she was the one for me. And my parents had told me I couldn't join a fraternity because I'd already almost flunked out of the first semester. Heaven knows if I'd joined a fraternity what I would be like in the second semester. But against their will, I joined a fraternity. And I didn't have a whole lot of allowance. I had a food allowance, and then I had a little bit of allowance to go do things on my own. And out of my food allowance and my other allowance, I took out $60 a month in 1986 or 1987 just so I could be around this girl, Angie Crouch. We became good friends. I waited almost that entire semester just getting to know her before I ever asked her out. And at the end of that semester, I asked her out on our first date. And it was December. It was the end of that semester. And I said, hey, would you like to go to church with me tomorrow morning? I'm going to drive back to Cleveland and go to my mom and dad's church. She said, sure. So we get on the road. And sure enough, just like when I was born, it was snow on the ground in Stephenville, Texas that year. So the roads got icy. Between here and Glen Rose, I ran off the road. Had somebody luckily come pull me out of the ditch. And at that point, we were too afraid to continue on, so we turned around and drove back home. Took her out to eat, dropped her off, and then didn't ask her out again for a month because I was so embarrassed. I thought, this girl will never go out with me again. And then she finally came up. She said, how come you've never asked me back out? And I was like, oh, what? Seriously? So then we were exclusive, as my son would say, from then on. She was... I was a freshman and she was a junior. She was junior class favorite. She was the vice president of the junior class. She was so popular, really pretty. She's that one right there. That's the one So anyway, her senior year and my sophomore year, we were just inseparable. And then my junior year, she goes off. She got accepted to law school in San Antonio and went to St. Mary's Law School. And as you can see there, you can see what I did. I got, you don't get invited to be a Purple Poo, you get kidnapped and initiated. You never have a say in it. I don't know if it's still the same, but so anyway, I became a Purple Poo, and that's what I did with my life for the next 2 years. But for the grace of God, listen to this. This is no joke. But for the grace of God, had He not, and yes, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. I think God put me in the Purple Poo, and that's, if y'all know anything about the poo, I would be like, there's no way. Being in the Purple Poo, our advisor was Dean Lease. And if you knew Dean Lease, and he was still there up to 5 years ago, Dean Lease was over the Purple Poo, and if you were in the poo, you did not get on academic probation. It was just a rule. If you were in the Purple Poo, you didn't have to go on academic probation. Otherwise, I'd have been on academic probation every single semester I was in college. I was able to graduate. I would not have been able to graduate if I had not been in the Purple Poo. And this is an absolute, honest, true fact. When I graduated, my GPA at Tarleton State University was a 2.03. You had to have a 2 to graduate. I was a 2.03. Yeah, but for the grace of God, He gives and takes away. So, anyway, I graduate from Tarleton, and I had my degree was in criminal justice, and my dad hated it. My dad and his father, my granddad, did not have a good relationship growing up. My granddad was Texas Highway Patrol, and my dad thought that cops were insecure people with just little man syndrome, and they just bullied everybody. My dad hated police. So when I graduated, I went home and started secretly applying for jobs. And one day, while I was out, the Dallas Police Department called and said, is Chuck Gilliland there? We want to offer him a job. And my dad's like, who the heck is this? Oh, this is Detective so-and-so with Dallas Police Department. And my dad hung up. Well, luckily, the next time he called, I was home. And it was strange because I came home and there were boxes by the front door with my clothes in them. And he was dead serious. He said, you got a job? I hope it starts soon so you have a place to live because you're not staying here. And I went and stayed with a friend until I got hired. And luckily, by the grace of God, my academy didn't start for 3 months. But they had a pre-app position for a new recruit to come work. It was prior to the academy starting, and all I did was grade papers of people who came and took tests for the police academy. So I got a job, I moved out, got an apartment in Dallas. My dad tried to be supportive as much as he could, but sometimes you just can't get there. I can tell he was trying. Sometimes he just couldn't get there. After police academy, we had graduation. I've got to get this thing moving. He comes to my graduation, which was surprising. And after my graduation was over, I saw him in the corner talking to Captain David James, who was over all the training in all of Dallas PD. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is he saying? Because my dad has a tendency to just say what's ever on the tip of his tongue. He just doesn't think about things before he talks. So I waited till he got done, and I ran over there. I'm like, Dad, what'd you say to him? And my dad was like, I'm okay with you being a cop. I was like, what? He said, yeah. He said, I think this is going to work out. Never told me what they talked about. And I talked to David James later on when he was police chief of Carrollton, and I just tried to jog his memory. What did you tell my dad? And he's like, I don't remember. So anyway, that'll be one of those things that maybe God will reveal to me in heaven. But it changed my dad. It changed our whole relationship. Went to work for Dallas PD. I worked in Southeast Dallas, which was the most violent, crime-ridden part of Dallas. It was Oak Cliff and Fair Park, and it was in the 1990s when Dallas was the stolen car capital of the United States. So every night I would go to work, and my goal was to get into a car chase every single night, which didn't happen, but every other night it did. I got into a ton of fights. I fought all the time. Saw lots of shootings, lots of stabbings, lots of horrific situations where human beings doing things to other human beings that should not be done. And I didn't realize until I left that it was the darkest place I'd ever been in my life. And it wasn't just the darkest place because of the crime and the violence. It was the darkest place spiritually I had ever been in my life. Every officer in my beat had a wife, and they also had a girlfriend that they would go visit when they took their lunch breaks. And everybody knew it. It wasn't a secret. And the little over 2 years that I was at Dallas, I never once knew anybody there that claimed to be Christian. It was just, either you didn't talk about it, or there just weren't any. And I still to this day think back on some of the guys, and I wasn't acting like it either, okay? I'm not, point the finger and I got all these pointing back. I was not the good guy either. I was still living into that, Lord, let me have a little fun. That'll change, but it didn't change at that point. I was still living and trying to live in such a way that I pleased men, and I wanted to be accepted by all of those guys. God gives and God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In 1992, I had a pretty rough summer, and it was, I say pretty rough, it was rough on Angie, because as we had just gotten married. It was not rough on me at all. I was having a ball. I was going to work every night, and like my front windshield, I described it as going to see Die Hard every night. I mean, it was rock and roll all the time. It was a blast. But I had June, July, August. Each one of those months in 92, I had a visit to the hospital. I either got cut, or I got beat up with my own baton by a guy who was on PCP. I had 3 incidents where I wound up in the hospital and Angie had to come get me. And I did not realize what kind of effect it was having on her until that last time when she picked me up. And she's like, I can't do this anymore. And I'm sitting there like, what are we going to do? Because I'm not leaving Dallas. Well, I figured out real quick that I needed to leave Dallas to not to save my marriage. I mean, she wasn't going to divorce me yet. But the effect it was having on her, I knew I needed to leave. So anyway, so I wound up at DFW Airport because it was supposed to be so safe, right? 6 months after there. Have y'all ever heard of the old show in the 90s, World's Scariest Police Chases? Anybody remember that with Sergeant... I can't think of his name now. But anyway, I was on the very first episode of that show. Yeah. I was working at DFW Airport. Pulled the car over. The guy's lying to me. I know he's lying. I pull my John Wayne. Oh, you're not leaving until I figure out who you are. And he's like, yeah, I am. And he jumps in his car. It's running. He puts it in gear. And I jump in with him. And I'm trying to get the keys. And next thing my feet are bouncing. I'm like, what is that? And we're driving. We're doing like 50 miles an hour. He pushes me out. I get hit by a Suburban. Anyway, Angie comes to pick me up at the hospital again. And I was like, honey, this is DFW Airport. This is the safest place in the world. If I can't work here, what the heck am I going to do? And she was very gracious. She said, no. She said, I understand. It's pretty safe. She said, you just won't do anything like this ever again. I was like, yes, dear. And I never went to the hospital again because of somebody else. Now, I went because of some things I did. Were stupid, but that's another story. Angie gets hired by the Texas Attorney General's office about this time, and she goes to work. We had, in 1997, I got Officer of the Year because I was just blowing and going so crazy. So blessed be the name of the Lord. He gives. He showed me so much favor. But that wasn't the greatest thing that happened in 1997. We had Kate Lorian Gilliland, our first child, born September 28th. After that, Angie and I decided it was time to move out of the Metroplex. We weren't going to raise kids in the Metroplex. So we started this like 2 or 3 year journey to move to Dublin because that's where she's from. So looking for land, building a house, it took forever, but it was all good. July 5th of 99, we had Cole Baxter Gilliland, my son. 2000, I got promoted to sergeant. By mid-2001, we were in our house. It was great. And then I'm sure y'all know what happened in 2001. I'm a sergeant in the Anti-Air Piracy Division. And 9/11 happens. And man, the world for aviation and law enforcement changed overnight. We did a lot of proactive stuff. By God's grace, I was named Supervisor of the Year that year, and not only that, but the Greater Dallas Crime Commission recognized me for being the officer of the Greater Dallas area for that year. So, and it just by the grace of God. So we're living in Dublin. We're going to First United Methodist Church. That was Angie's home church. And one day, Ed, what's Ed's last name? Ed cornered me. I'll think of his last name in a minute. And said, "You want to teach Sunday school?" And Angie's standing right next to me. And before I could get the words "no" out of my mouth, she said, "Yes, of course he will." And he's like, well, "Great. We have the 55 and older group that needs a new teacher. There's only 3 retired pastors in that class. It's going to be great." So you should have seen me after my first Sunday. I had pools of water. My shirt was soaking wet. But it was a great learning experience, and they were very gracious as well. But it started me kind of on a path to slowly get back into my faith. After I started the Sunday school class, there was no children's ministry, and we had 2 little kids. So Angie and I started up a children's ministry there. We were doing Bible Bowl every Sunday night, and it grew to from just our kids to. In a couple of years, we had 20 kids coming to this thing. And it was in August of 2005. I was standing in the middle of all these kids, had 60 kids in Vacation Bible School, and the theme was farm something. I was wearing overalls, and I had a big old cowboy hat on, and I was telling them about living out in the country, and I raised my hands, just like I did back in my dorm room in 1987. I said, "Jesus, I love you." I told them I could go out on the backyard, on the back porch where nobody was around. I could do that anytime I wanted. When I did that, time stopped for me, and God asked me, "Do you really love me?" And I said, "Yes, Lord, I do." And it was just it was a commitment. When I came to, time around me had not stopped. It had stopped for me in that moment, looking at the Lord. But I knew at that point I was to follow God. Went home, Angie and I started talking. I went to a walk to Emmaus, met a guy named David Walters, who was a Fort Worth police officer. And we became best friends. He just happened to be on the National Board of Directors for Fellowship of Christian Peace Officers, and tried to talk me into starting a chapter. I wasn't quite ready at the time, but in 2008, immediately after that, we come to Cottonwood. We were wanting to be fed. We were not getting fed where we were. So we come to Cottonwood. Within 6 months, Angie and I went to Southeast China, and then we went on a trip to Botswana with Chief Hooper, and you've probably seen the picture with there. Okay, this is the Chief of Gaborone, Botswana, and I mean he's it. He's the number 1 law enforcement officer. Dang it, my time's up. I'll make this quick. Anyway, the very next one shows Bob Hooper in there. We got to pray over the chief of Gaborone, Botswana. And that was not why we went. The last day I was telling them, I got to go to the police station. I've got to go visit those guys. On the plane ride back, I was praying, God, where do you want us to serve? We visited China, we visited Africa. Where do you want us to serve? And God said, well, how about you start with Jerusalem before you go to Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth? And man, that was hard to hear. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, and just this conversation in my head, well, you haven't talked to any of the cops back in your own department. What have you done? You haven't done anything. So I went back and sent an email department-wide, knowing that I was going to get in trouble, but in big, bold caps letters, and I changed the font and everything, and I sent this out to every single person, the chief on down. I said, I'm a Christian. I've been a closet Christian for years, and I'm coming out of the closet. And I sent it, and I thought, oh gosh, here it comes. I'm just waiting for chiefs, captains, people. What are you doing? Nobody came and got onto me for that. But I had 40 police officers that responded and said, I'm a Christian too, but I don't know how to be a Christian at work. Well, there was my Jerusalem. We started an FCPO chapter. It grew. We were inviting every agency in the Metroplex. We had so many guys that were coming. A year later, I got asked to be on the National Board of Directors, which I was like, oh my gosh, now here's my Judea, my Samaria. Now I'm responsible for other parts of the United States. And I'm cutting some of this out, but I was at a board meeting maybe a year later, and we're sitting there, and the executive director says, we keep getting all these phone calls from guys all over the country wanting some law enforcement Bible study stuff. Do y'all know anybody that writes devotions for cops? Well, no. And then he's like, somebody's got to step up and do it. I'm like, yeah. I'm dyslexic, but one of you guys needs to step up and do it. I can't write. So, got home, and of course, God got a hold of me. And next thing I know, I'm writing devotionals. I'm not having issues with dyslexia. But for the grace of God, I realized at that point I was living out 2 Corinthians 12:9. Which says, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I would rather boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. And like Mike said, I wrote 9 or several other books since then. Went to Tarleton and finished out my 30 years as law enforcement, and then just retired for good, stayed home. I've written another 32 books that I haven't even published. So God has continued to work through my weakness and do some great things. I went to seminary after I retired. Went to Dallas Theological Seminary with my daughter. That was sweet. She had gotten in seminary, and I told her one day, I said, you're living my dream. I had a dream when I was in junior high. I was going to be in full-time ministry, and I was going to go to seminary. I was going to do it. And she's like, well, Dad, you are doing full-time ministry. And I was like, well, yeah, that was part of it. But I said, I never got to go to seminary. And she said, well, gee whiz, you're retired. What else have you got to do? So I applied and got into seminary. And here's how God works, okay? I've got dyslexia. I've had all this stuff. Now I'm an old guy going to school, and I haven't been to school in years. I graduated seminary with high honors, which means my GPS was somewhere between 3.85 and a 4, and I don't know what it was, but my wife and parents were like, how does that happen? And I said, well, it really helps when you like the subject matter. So anyway, now I work for American Warrior Association, which I still get to minister to cops, veterans, and active duty military. I talked so long, my battery almost went dead. Yeah, time. Man, through that has been such an incredible blessing in ministry to witness to police officers and soldiers, and I've been on with them for about a year and a half. And if y'all were here that day, we baptized one of the guys who came down from Georgetown and wanted to be baptized. After that happened, we baptized a couple of other guys on an actual trip in Colorado, and the water was way cold. I've got great video, but you can't see it because I'm in my underwear. It's ugly. But we baptized 3 guys, and they were in their underwear too. Some of them were bigger than me. But they said in all the years they'd done programs, they'd never had anybody been baptized before. Now all of a sudden, every leader is witnessing and ministering, but by the grace of God, guys are coming to know Christ who had never had an opportunity to know Christ before. So the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And I'm just so thankful for the favor that He has shown in my life. And that's where I am today. So thank y'all for listening.